10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 153. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Hope you are all doing well out there. Thank you so much for joining us again for yet another episode. My name is Nick Manella. I'm the creator and host of the show. If you are brand new to the program, welcome, and thank you so much for tuning in. Just to remind you, you can get the PDF to this episode and all other episodes that we've ever done by heading over to our Patreon page and pledging a very, very small amount every month. It's only $3 to get access to every single thing that we do. Before we jump into the show, I wanted to give a shout out to our new Patreon members this week. Wanted to give a quick shout out to Umid, Barbara, Peter, Lewis, and RJ. Thank you all so much for joining up to support the show, get a ton of benefits from doing so, and keeping this show coming at you week after week in high quality. Thank you guys so much. So head over to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, and go over there, pledge your support, and get all of those fantastic benefits so that you can be a better jazz musician. All right, let's jump into today's episode. I'm excited about it. So today we're going to be taking a look at a couple of really short pieces of vocabulary. And before we jump into the actual material, I wanted to explain to you why I'm presenting this stuff to you. You know, it occurred to me this week with a few of my students that I give you guys a lot of, 2-measure, 3-measure, sometimes even 4-measure pieces of vocabulary on this show. And that's not always the best thing to work on for everybody at every level. So if you're somebody out there, which I know a lot of you are that listen to this show, that's kind of just getting started and just learning your way around chords and just learning the process of starting to take something and maybe put it through all 12 keys or even just a couple of keys. It doesn't have to be all 12. Learning a 4-measure lick can be really difficult. It's a lot to comprehend at one time. So what I've done is I've put together a couple of pieces of less than 1-measure vocabulary, but still very, very high quality material that's going to benefit you a lot if you learn it. So there are a couple of advantages to this. First of all, I've only put these pieces of vocabulary over dominant chords. So we're not dealing with a full 2-5-1 or some kind of progression. You're only dealing with learning this stuff over one chord. And also, as I mentioned, it's very short. So it's not going to take a lot of memory to remember exactly what's going on in these melodic devices. So I think that this is going to help you get off on the right foot, learn how to play some vocabulary, and work your way up to the longer examples that I give you a lot of the time. So here's what I want you to do with these pieces of vocabulary. The goal with these little short pieces of vocabulary is going to be to put them in 12 keys as quickly as you possibly can. When I say quickly, I don't mean to play them really fast. I just mean don't waste any time. They're so short that you're going to be able to start putting them into multiple keys right away. And that's really the goal here. So the thing is that I want you to develop some confidence in learning material through all the keys. And these little short pieces of vocabulary are going to help you develop that confidence. And then you're going to feel like, all right, now I can go on and I can learn more complicated, more involved, longer lines after you get some of these under your belt. And you start realizing that it's not impossible. And this is something that you can tackle, even if you are a relatively inexperienced jazz musician. This is a part of practice that every jazz musician has to go through. Taking something and putting it in a bunch of different keys, because we have to stay fluent and we have to be able to handle any chord that's thrown at us. This exercise is going to build those skills right away. Okay, now let's jump into the actual examples. So I've got two little short examples for you. As I mentioned, they're both over dominant chords. And what I have also done on the PDF this week is included a practice progression, which is basically one measure of each dominant chord, cycling through the circle of fourths, which is going to bring you right around to all keys. So the goal is to be able to just play through that with no pauses and just rattle off this piece of vocabulary in every key. Okay, so let's jump into the first line. So the first line is very, very easy, and I made it that way for a reason. Okay, so let me play it for you first, and then we will talk about what's actually going on in it. So hopefully you can hear that is, first of all, an extremely short piece of vocabulary, and second of all, it's very simple. So if you got the PDF, you've probably already figured out what's going on, but let me explain. So all I'm doing is I'm arpeggiating up the seventh chord. So 1, 3, 5, flat 7. Then I'm going to the root. Then I'm using a chromatic passing tone to get back to the seventh. So it's 1, 3, 5, 7, 1, major 7, flat 7. So there's a couple of things you've got to know in order to play this. You've got to know the 4 chord tones to every dominant chord. And then you also have to be able to use a little bit of chromaticism. This is about the simplest form of chromaticism that I can show you. One chromatic passing tone to get from the root back to the flat 7. So for most of you out there, at least most of you listening to this show, that should be relatively simple for you, and it should be relatively unintimidating for you to actually play this. So I want you to learn it, memorize it. You could even start by just playing 1, 3, 5, 7 in all 12 keys, which is something you may or may not have done before, but that would be a great place to start. Then you could go and you could even practice just playing from the root down to the flat 7 by way of that chromatic passing tone. So you could even break up a line as short as this, and then you start to put it in all 12 keys. Extremely simple, but very effective. All right, let's listen to the second piece of vocabulary, which is a little bit more complicated. Let's hear it first, then I'll talk about it. So you can hear the first thing that strikes me when I hear that is the fact that there's a triplet in there. So that makes it a little bit more complicated rhythmically. But also what's happening in this is I'm starting on the fifth of a chord. So this requires a little bit of a mental leap, right? We've talked about this a lot before, is that, if you're staring at a C7 chord, in order to think about what the fifth is right away, that's a little bit tougher, but something that you definitely need to know how to do. So what I'm doing is I'm playing the fifth, then I'm jumping up to the ninth, then I'm playing a triplet. I'm going 9, flat 7, 5, and then I'm playing 2 eighth notes after the triplet, 4 to 3. So again, it's just like a little line cliche that's very, very short, but I think that you're going to find this one a little bit more difficult, and it's going to pay off a lot if you learn it. So that's that second line. Make sure you grab the PDF to get both of those and start putting them in all 12 keys. So that brings me to my next point, actually putting them in all 12 keys. So what you might want to start by doing is taking each key individually and pausing and thinking about what you're about to do before you put it in the next key around that circle of fourths. Then when you feel like you're getting pretty good at that and you're starting to be able to look at the chord and play the line shortly thereafter, then you start to actually do it without pausing and a consistent tempo through it. So then at that point, you're playing through the entire progression. And the cool thing about this is these lines are very melodic. And also when you put them around the circle of fourths, it sounds very melodic as you go from key to key, because again, jazz moves in fourths a lot of the time. I don't want to say the majority of the time, but you know what? I will say it, the majority of the time. So learning that circle of fourths and learning to bring melodies around that circle of fourths is going to pay huge dividends for you as a jazz musician. So let's say that I was practicing that second line, and I'm getting to the point where I'm starting to feel pretty confident that I can actually do it. So maybe I put on my iReal Pro, or I fire up my band in a box and I create a play along that's one measure of each dominant chord right around the circle of fourths. And then I take that line and I start playing it through that progression. Check out what this sounds like. I think you'll be surprised at actually how cool this sounds as it goes around the circle of fourths. Sounds pretty fantastic, right? I mean, it's very melodic. You're getting that circle fourths movement. You're getting this cool little bebop line that's not very hard to learn. So I think this is going to be so good for so many of you out there to start to build confidence and start to make your way around multiple keys and do all that amazing stuff that we have to do as jazz musicians, but just not struggle with it so hard. After you do some of these, then you could start to get into some longer material that's more challenging. I truly think this is going to be revolutionary for a lot of you out there. So use these 2 lines that I've given you to start, and then start to come up with your own. All right. Either that or drop me a message and ask me for some more. I'd be happy to give you some more, especially if you're a Patreon member. I would love to do that for you. Maybe I will post more on Patreon in the coming week. Okay. Now, the other really cool thing about these is these are pieces of vocabulary that I would actually use in a solo. These are not just made up things that I would never actually play. There would be no point in that. So what I'm going to do to close out the show is play over a blues and use some of these 2 pieces of vocabulary in my solo to see how you can actually take this and use it in real life, not just for an exercise. We actually are going for the application of this stuff rather than just the theory of it. Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed that episode. Drop me any questions you might have in our Facebook 10-Minute Jazz Lesson community group. You can join up, simply request a join, and I will approve you, and then you'll be part of that. You can get in on some of the discussions we have in there. All right, make sure you go and sign up for Patreon, patreon.com/10-Minute Jazz Lesson, or go to 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, and become a member today. Thank you to everybody that's already done that. Hope you have a great weekend. Start working on this stuff immediately, and we'll see you next week with some brand new episodes. Have a great one, everybody. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you.